From New York, this is Democracy Now!
A consortium of news outlets from around the world, including Frontline, have been investigating the use of the spyware called Pegasus and the Israeli company NSO Group that sells it to foreign governments.
The government can see anything on the phone, including pictures, contacts, listening into calls.
The Israeli cyber surveillance company NSO Group says its powerful spyware is meant to target terrorists and criminals. But a shocking investigation shows it's actually being used by client countries to spy on activists, politicians, dissidents, and journalists. Israel allowed NSO to keep doing business with Saudi Arabia, even after the Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi was assassinated in its consulate in Turkey. Khashoggi's fiancé was one of Pegasus's targets.
I remember the first days after the murder, a lot of times they try to hack my email. And then Gmail was sending to me emails that time. Someone tried to open your account.
We'll speak with the Secretary General of Amnesty International, Dr. Agnes Callamard, who, as a UN Special Rapporteur, led an investigation into the murder of Khashoggi, and with Nina Lakhani, senior reporter at The Guardian, one of 17 media organizations who are part of the Pegasus Project. Then, in the latest attack on immigrant communities, a federal judge has struck down DACA. That's Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. We'll look at what's next with a DACA recipient and activist who's lived in the U.S. for nearly 30 years. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Researchers have found India's death toll from COVID-19 may be 10 times higher than the country's official tally. A new report by the Center for Global Development finds there have been as many as 4.7 million excess deaths in India since the start of the pandemic. India's official death toll from the pandemic is 414,000. This comes as COVID cases surge across the globe. Indonesia reported over 1,300 deaths Monday, the highest single-day death toll since the start of the pandemic. But public health experts fear the actual toll is far higher. In Japan, the number of COVID cases linked to the Olympic Games has now reached 71. The opening ceremony set for Friday in Tokyo, where COVID cases are at a 6-month high. In the United States, COVID-19 cases have tripled over the past month as the highly contagious Delta variant rapidly spreads across the country, particularly in areas with low vaccination rates. Cases are now rising in all 50 states. On Monday, President Biden urged everyone eligible to get vaccinated.
If you're unvaccinated, you are not protected. So please get vaccinated. Get vaccinated now. It works. It's safe. It's free. It's convenient.
On Monday, the American Academy of Pediatrics recommended all students over the age of 2, as well as teachers and staff, wear masks as they return to school, even if they have been vaccinated. However, many states have already banned school mask mandates. In related news, a federal judge has ruled Indiana University can proceed with its plan to require all students to get vaccinated before returning to campus. Meanwhile, Twitter has temporarily suspended Republican Congressmember Marjorie Taylor Greene for posting misinformation about COVID-19 and vaccines. Acting Haitian Prime Minister Claude Joseph says he plans to transfer power today to Dr. Ariel Henry, a neurosurgeon who was appointed by President Jovenel Moïse shortly before he was assassinated July 7th. Both Joseph and Henry had claimed power following Moïse's death. Over the weekend, the United States and other members of the so-called core group threw its support behind Henry, who will become Haiti's 7th prime minister in 4 years. On Monday, State Department spokesperson Ned Price defended the Biden administration's intervention. He was questioned by the Associated Press's Matt Lee.
We are taking the side of the Haitian people. We're taking the side of
the guy who was named but hadn't taken office.
We are taking the side of the Haitian people. This is a dialogue that has been ongoing between various Haitian political stakeholders.
Whether you want to admit it or not, there was a shift in what you had been saying prior to that statement. You were all in support of the acting prime minister, and then all of a sudden on Saturday, you and the other members of the core group came out in support of Mr. Henry.
Matt, we are supporting the inclusive dialogue that Haiti's political actors are undertaking themselves.
In news from Peru, the socialist teacher and union leader Pedro Castillo has been officially declared the winner of the June 6 presidential election after the right-wing presidential candidate Keiko Fujimori failed in her attempt to overturn the results. Castillo won by about 44,000 votes. He spoke to supporters Monday.
We will reject any pretensions of another country's model. We Peruvians can. We Peruvians will manage true economic development, guaranteeing legal and economic stability. I ask that Keiko Fujimori not place barriers in the way so that we may move forward and make this a government of all Peruvians.
In Iraq, at least 35 people died Monday in an explosion at a market in the Sadr City neighborhood of Baghdad. The market was packed with shoppers preparing for the Eid al-Adha festival. More than 60 people were injured. ISIS claimed responsibility. In Afghanistan, 3 rockets landed near the presidential palace in Kabul earlier today, while Afghan President Ashraf Ghani and other top officials were taking part in outdoor Eid prayers. The incident was aired live on television. There were no immediate reports of injuries. The Taliban denied responsibility for the blasts. Ben & Jerry's has announced it will stop selling its ice cream in Israeli settlements in the occupied West Bank, saying it's, quote, inconsistent with our values. Supporters of BDS, the boycott, divestment and sanctions movement, hailed the decision, which comes after years of pressure by groups including Vermonters for Justice in Palestine. This is Mahmoud Nawaja, coordinator of the Palestinian BDS National Committee.
This announcement is so important and came after years of pressure on the company to end its involvement in the Israeli violation of the international law and our Palestinian rights.
Israel's new foreign minister, Yair Lapid, blasted Ben & Jerry's decision, claiming it was a, quote, disgraceful capitulation to anti-Semitism. Ben & Jerry's ice cream was founded in Vermont by Ben Cohen and Jerry Greenfield, both of whom are Jewish. A Moroccan court has sentenced independent journalist Omar Radi to 6 years in prison. He was arrested last year on what press freedom advocates call retaliatory charges. For years, Radi has been targeted by Moroccan authorities for his reporting on corruption and human rights. Last year, Amnesty International revealed Moroccan authorities had hacked his phone using Pegasus spyware from the Israeli company NSO Group. We'll have more on Pegasus and Omar Radi by speaking to the Secretary General of Amnesty International after headlines. A Florida man who took part in the January 6th insurrection has been sentenced to 8 months in federal prison. Paul Hodgkins was filmed wearing a Trump 2020 T-shirt and carrying a Trump flag on the floor of the U.S. Senate after Trump supporters attacked the Capitol in an effort to disrupt counting of electoral votes. Hodgkins is the first Capitol rioter convicted of a felony to be sentenced. Federal prosecutors had asked for an 18-month sentence. Meanwhile, House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy has recommended 5 Republicans to serve on the Select Committee investigating the January 6th insurrection. All 5 voted against impeaching Trump after the riot. 3 of the Republican lawmakers, Jim Jordan of Ohio, Jim Banks of Indiana, and Troy Nehls of Texas, also voted to overturn the 2020 election. In Oregon, the bootleg fire has grown to over 350,000 acres. It's the largest wildfire in the United States this year and the 3rd largest in the history of Oregon. There are now 80 fires burning in 13 states, including 7 other large fires in Oregon. In Minnesota, authorities arrested Indigenous leader Winona LaDuke and at least 6 other water protectors Monday during a protest at the Shell River against the Enbridge Line 3 tar sands pipeline. In Washington, D.C., over 100 women were arrested Monday outside the Supreme Court during a protest calling for voting rights and economic justice. Those arrested included the Reverend Liz Theoharis, co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign, who helped organize the Women's Moral March.
We are all too aware that the extremist politicians who are suppressing and stealing our ability to vote are the same politicians who deny living wages, refuse to expand health care, exploit immigrants and LGBTQIA people and women. And so, we march.
Lena Bloom has made history by becoming the first trans model to appear on the cover of the Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue. On Monday, Bloom tweeted, quote, "This moment heals a lot of pain in the world. We deserve this moment. We have waited millions of years to show up as survivors and be seen as full humans filled with wonder," she said. Meanwhile, Luke Prokop has become the first active player in the National Hockey League to come out as gay. The Nashville Predators drafted the 19-year-old player last year. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman in New York, joined by Democracy Now! Co-host Juan Gonzalez in New Brunswick, New Jersey. Hi, Juan.
Hi, Amy, and welcome to all of our listeners and viewers across the country and around the world.
Well, we begin today's show with the shocking findings of the Pegasus Project, an international collaboration of 17 media organizations that investigated the Israeli cyber surveillance company NSO Group. The NSO Group manufactures and sells advanced spyware to governments called Pegasus that can secretly infect a mobile phone and harvest its information. The company claims its spyware is meant to target terrorists and criminals, but data leaked to the Pegasus Project suggests several countries use the powerful cyber espionage tool to spy on activists, politicians, dissidents, and journalists. The consortium analyzed a leaked data set of 50,000 phone numbers that allegedly belong to persons of interest to NSO's customers. A sample showed dozens of cases of successful and attempted Pegasus infections. The reporting also revealed a massive wave of attacks by NSO Group's customers on iPhones, potentially affecting thousands of Apple users worldwide. And one of the most shocking findings, the Pegasus Project reported the Israeli government allowed NSO to continue to do business with Saudi Arabia even after the Saudi journalist and dissident Jamal Khashoggi was assassinated in 2018 in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. In a minute, we'll speak with the Secretary General of Amnesty International and one of the lead reporters on the Pegasus Project. But first, this is a PBS Frontline report that follows Washington Post reporter Dana Priest, one of the more than 80 journalists working on the Pegasus Project, as she traveled to Turkey and verify if Pegasus had been used to surveil Khashoggi's fiancée, Hatice Cengiz. The report was coordinated by the journalism nonprofit Forbidden Stories, with technical support from Amnesty International Security Lab.
On October 2nd, 2018, journalist Jamal Khashoggi walked into the Saudi consulate in Turkey and never came back out. Around the time of his murder, a powerful spyware may have been used to surveil his family.
Journalists, all are said to have been hacked by spyware developed by the Israeli company called the NSO Group.
A consortium of news outlets from around the world, including Frontline, have been investigating the use of the spyware called Pegasus and the Israeli company NSO Group that sells it to foreign governments.
The government can see anything on the phone, including pictures, contacts, listening into calls.
As part of the investigation into Pegasus, Washington Post reporter Dana Priest traveled to Istanbul. Working with the journalism nonprofit Forbidden Stories, the reporters were given access to 50,000 phone numbers concentrated in countries known to be NSO clients. They included journalists, politicians, human rights activists, and Jamal Khashoggi's fiancée, Hatice Cengiz. Dana Priest and a producer working for Frontline and Forbidden Stories met with Hatice to verify if her phone had in fact been hacked.
What I'm doing is basically a backup, and based on this backup we will look if there is any trace of infection, past or current. What we're looking for is traces of a software called Pegasus.
I remember the first days after the murder, a lot of times they try to hack my email. And then Gmail was sending to me emails that time. Someone tried to open your account or something like that.
The simple ones are like that message. The really sophisticated ones, they don't need a message. They don't need you to do anything.
Really?
Yeah.
But why people say the iPhone, the more safe to no one can hack or...
That's what the iPhone says, the company. But it's not true. So the Pegasus software can, if it gets inside, I don't know if it gets inside every time it tries, but if it gets inside, it can turn your microphone on so that it can, whoever is doing it can listen to what you're saying and what other people are saying. But it also can go into your email, your WhatsApp, your contacts, your pictures, your videos, and it can just steal them all, make a copy of everything. And then, you know, our thought is if it's doing that against people like you, who are not terrorists or criminals, then why? Part of what we want to show, what we think we know, what we are discovering, and what we're researching is, no, they use it against civilians. And why would they want to know what you're doing?
Yes, it's my personal life. It's my secret life. It is not enough to say, please stop after this murder. Please, Yani, it's over.
After getting backups of both Hatice's new phone and the one she was using at the time of Khashoggi's murder, Dana Priest sent them to Amnesty International's security lab for analysis. A few hours later, while on the way back to the airport, she received a call with the results.
The spree of bad news is never ending. So I checked both the uploads. The new one seems clean to me. The old one, however, has some traces that seem consistent with what we've seen. So on the 6th of October of 2018 seems to have been a first compromise, which was followed by some additional traces on the 9th and then on the 12th, which is obviously, as you know, pretty timely within the context, obviously.
Yeah. Wow. She's already been infected, so it's already happened, so it's great that you're finding it.
Yeah, I don't think...
There was now proof that Pegasus had been used to target one of the people closest to Jamal Khashoggi around the time of his death. In a statement, NSO Group said its technology was not associated in any way with Khashoggi's murder. The company said it was on a life-saving mission, preventing terror attacks and serious crimes. But in addition to Hatice, Frontline, Forbidden Stories, and the partner news outlets are investigating the cases of journalists, human rights activists, politicians, and others in more than 50 countries who may have been targeted for surveillance.
That video report, part of an upcoming Frontline documentary produced with Forbidden Stories to air on PBS. And that last reporter voiced Anna Priest of The Washington Post, who went to visit Khashoggi's fiancé in Turkey and found her phone infected. For more, we go to London to speak with Dr. Agnès Callamard, the new Secretary General of Amnesty International, previously the United Nations Special Rapporteur on extrajudicial summary or arbitrary executions. As UN Special Rapporteur, she led an investigation into the murder of the Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi. She was also director of the Global Freedom of Expression Project at Columbia University. Dr. Callamard, welcome to Democracy Now! Congratulations on your new position at Amnesty International. This is explosive information you are releasing right now, Amnesty working with the Forbidden Stories Project. Let's start with the example of Jamal Khashoggi and what this says about what to many may be the first time they're hearing about this spyware produced by Israel.
Well, what it first shows is what you have highlighted, that contrary to what NSO is claiming, the spyware Pegasus is used to target people absolutely unrelated to criminal activities or terrorism. It is used to target individuals like Atice, the family or friends of human rights defenders and journalists. It is used to target journalists and human rights defenders. In fact, according to Amnesty International, at least 180 journalists have been targeted. I think what the project is showing is the breadth and the scale of the abuse. We already had element of anecdotal evidence that the spyware had been used to target human rights defenders. What we have with Pegasus project is actually the demonstration that the misuse of the spyware is systematic and it is global.
And Dr. Callamard, what do we know about the NSO group, its relationship to the Israeli government, and does it just sell this software and then no longer has connection with it, or does it somehow maintain an ability to monitor what its clients are doing with the software?
Okay, so with regard to the first question, the intelligence industry is, for the government of Israel, a very important industry. It's a strategic industry. It is also an industry that is supposedly regulated in that every export by NSO is being licensed by the state of Israel. So that's a relationship. There is a relationship at a strategic level and there is a relationship at a regulatory level. So I think the nature of the relationship is pretty close and pretty deep. So when we talk about NSO's failure to act with due diligence, we are also talking about the failure of the government of Israel to abide by its obligation under international law. That is the first issue. With regard to NSO relationship to its client, it is actually a pretty close relationship in that NSO has the capacity to close down, to shut down the spyware and any kind of system it is providing to the client. NSO is claiming that it does not have any oversight over the use of the spyware, and we don't know that for sure, but that's what they are claiming. But they do have sufficient relationship that they can shut down the system, which is why we are calling on them now, given the evidence being provided, that they shut down every single system in place with all of the clients that have been listed by Amnesty and others over the last few days.
This is NSA whistleblower Ed Snowden speaking to The Guardian about spyware sales, he says, needing to be stopped.
If you don't do anything to stop the sale of this technology, it's not just going to be 50,000 targets. It's going to be 50 million targets, and it's going to happen much more quickly than any of us expect. The way we do that is to halt the trade around this technology.
Dr. Agnès Callamard, would you go that far?
Absolutely, absolutely. So Amnesty International, as well as, in fact, when I was a special rapporteur, I did the same, are calling for a moratorium over the use and the export of that intelligence spywares and that industry more generally that needs to be more heavily regulated. We are calling for a moratorium because we believe that in the current conditions and environment, it is impossible to properly monitor how it is going to be used. Therefore, the only option is for a moratorium over its sale and its export. The other point I want to make, following on the journalist that you just interviewed, is that indeed that spyware is a weapon. This is the only way we need to look at it. It is a weapon against democracy. It is a weapon against human rights. It is a weapon against freedom of the press, against scrutiny of governments. It is a weapon against the justice and fair trial, as we are seeing in Turkey. And it is used extraterritorially, meaning that a government of a country such as Morocco can use that spyware to target people on the territory of another country. That goes against every dimension of international law and certainly against the UN Charter. So we are talking here about a pretty bad thing.
So you mentioned Morocco, and I wanted to talk about the Moroccan court yesterday sentencing the independent journalist Omar Radi to 6 years in prison, arrested last year on what press freedom advocates called retaliatory charges. For years, Omar has been targeted by Moroccan authorities for his reporting on corruption and human rights. And last year, your organization, Dr. Calamard, Amnesty International, revealed Moroccan authorities had hacked his phone using Pegasus spyware from the Israeli company NSO Group. I spoke to Radi last year, just weeks before he was arrested.
Pegasus is quite silent program. You don't feel it actually, and it's not a persistent program. It doesn't stay in your phone or in your computer. It works using a network injection, so people need to be near you to make themselves pass as a relay antenna, and your phone is connected to a fake relay antenna, and then the network injection works, and then the program works, and they get I don't know. He has a lot of features. He can use your microphone. He can use your keyboard. He can use your screen, and get any information that is stored in your phone. So I don't know what the amount of information they stolen from my phone, but I'm sure in this pro-state medias, they published many information that I have exchanged even in Signal, which is known that that is a very safe program. So I have evidence that my own conversations have been leaked to pro-state media. The same that are leaking also my bank information.
So that's Moroccan journalist Omar Radi, again, just yesterday, sentenced to 6 years in prison. Soon after we spoke last year, he was imprisoned. Dr. Agnès Calamard, if you can comment on this case.
Of course, what you are describing right now is an incredible miscarriage of justice, but it is also demonstrating how harmful, if we needed to, how harmful that spyware is. It is, of course, a violation of, let's say, the right to privacy. But when it is being used, it is the beginning to, it has a domino effect on a range of other violations. In the case of Omar Radi, that spying through the spyware led to his imprisonment, led to his arbitrary detention. In other cases, even though the causal relationship is, of course, difficult to establish, in other cases there are someone such as the Mexican journalist Cecilio Pineda being compromised with his phone, and a couple of days later he's being murdered. We cannot make a causal relationship between the compromise and the murder, but surely the suspicion is there, as it is in the case of Omar, that the spying and the use of the spyware led to his arbitrary detention and that led to this unlawful imprisonment. It is an extremely harmful tool at the hand of government that will do anything to protect themselves, and not just, by the way, the usual suspect. In the list of countries that have used the spyware, we find Hungary, we find India, of course we found Morocco, but we also find Azerbaijan, Mexico. More than 20 journalists have been targeted through the spyware. India, more than 40 journalists have been targeted.
And Dr. Callamard, I wanted to ask you about a remarkable coincidence, it seems. The very day that these revelations come forward from this international consortium, the United States government suddenly announces that it has found that China was hacking into Microsoft email and a marshaled condemnation from other governments around the world, an investigation that was going on for months. And also they suddenly unsealed indictments that occurred back in May of some Chinese hackers. As a result, last night on the national news, a lot of the attention was on China's hacking, not so much on the revelations of that your consortium has unearthed here. How does this compare to some of the stuff that supposedly is happening that China is involved in?
Look, we have focused on the privatization of spying and intelligence through a focus on NSO. We know that the surveillance industry is very powerful and it is completely unregulated. So that is something that must remain on the international agenda. It does not mean that spying by government is not as crucially important. Of course it is. It may fall under different form of regulation. I have not followed closely enough the allegations against China and Microsoft. I will say that the overall surveillance world is one that is out of control. It is the Far West, whether it is powered by a government or powered by a private company, it is equally dangerous frankly, for global peace and for democracy. And it must be scrutinized and it must be regulated. I can't comment really on the motivation of the U.S. government and whether they were trying to derail a little bit the focus on NSO. I don't know whether they did it. My point is that there is an overall world here that we need to control and need to really regulate.
Dr. Agnes Callamard is our guest, Secretary General of Amnesty International. We're going to break, come back with her, and we'll be joined by Nina Lakhani, senior reporter at The Guardian, one of the 17 media organizations who are part of the Pegasus project. She specifically looked at the Mexican journalist Dr. Callamard just mentioned, who was murdered, and also looks at others who are surveilled as targets for potential hacking by NSO's clients. Stay with us.
It was understood every hour I could I'd be leaning on a glowing machine, just scratching my itches on the lights and the switches and the blips on the video screen. And when I saw my mama hanging from a third-floor ledge, begging for a hand back in, I said, I just hit bananas on my Ms. Pac-Man, and I gotta go at it again. Me and the janitor's kids, Antoine and Nando, burn up the watts on their dad's Nintendo. Tell Mom that I'm sorry, blood's thinner than Atari. And then a uniformed man said, you got skill. Uncle Sam's gonna subsidize your video thrill. Defender of the nation is a practical application. From a real leather seat at 30,000 feet, you don't even see the flames. Don't see river steam, hear people scream. Nobody knows their names. They're just
Video games by Charlie King. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez as we continue to look at the findings of the Pegasus Project, a collaboration of more than 80 journalists and 17 media organizations that's investigating the Israeli cyber surveillance company NSO Group. Mexico appears to have submitted more phone numbers for potential surveillance to the NSO Group than any other client country, over 15,000, including the numbers of teachers, journalists, judges, activists, and politicians. Mexico is one of the deadliest countries for journalists and human rights defenders. As part of the Pegasus Project, The Guardian reports at least 50 people close to Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador, including his wife, children, aides, and doctor, were included in the list for potential surveillance before AMLO's election. In their analysis of the Pegasus data leak, The Guardian also found the mobile phone number of Mexican journalist Cecilio Pineda Berto, who had been selected as a possible target for surveillance by a Mexican NSO Group client in the weeks leading up to his assassination in Guerrero in 2017. He frequently posted Facebook videos denouncing corruption between drug cartels and local government officials. On March 2, 2017, he posted this video, was killed 2 hours later.
There seem to be very strong ties between the government and this gang leader. If they don't react, more people will die. There are videos showing the deputy with El Tequilero. It's pathetic. There are really many things that are impossible to understand.
For more on what happened to Mexican journalist Cecilio Pineda Berto and what the role of Pegasus Project could have played in his murder, we are also joined by Nina Lakhani, senior reporter at The Guardian. Welcome back to Democracy Now!, Nina. Tell us what happened to him and its link to the NSO Group.
Hi, good morning. Well, what we know is that in the weeks leading up to Cecilio's murder, one of NSO's Mexican clients identified or selected his cell phone number as a candidate for surveillance. And that video that you just played, just a couple of hours after that, Cecilio Pineda had gone to to a car wash, and he was just resting in a hammock, making some calls. He'd called his mom. He was just speaking to some colleagues, planning what he was going to do that evening. And a gunman arrived on a motorbike, went by foot to the hammock where he was lying, which was hidden from the road, and shot him at least 6 times, and he died of his injuries. We were unable to confirm whether his phone was successfully infected with Pegasus, because the last time that the phone was seen was at the crime scene. It disappeared after that, so we were unable to do that. But what we do know is that the gunman knew where to find him, and we know that Cecilio had been receiving threats. He was worried. He had sought help from the federal government. That there's a protection mechanism that is meant to protect journalists and defenders who are facing threats linked to their work. They failed to do so. But we also know, I managed to obtain the last interview that he had with the protective mechanism, in which they're basically saying to him, look, unless you're willing to get out of the state and take this one offer that we're making of relocating you, we can't help you. We're going to close your case, which is what they did. And what he says to them, he says, look, I don't think I need to move. I've changed where I'm sleeping. I don't leave my car in the street. I don't think they don't know where I am. The people who want to hurt me and who might send gunmen to kill me, they wouldn't be able to find me because I'm just moving all the time. Little did he know that there were certainly that his phone numbers was selected for potential surveillance just weeks after that.
And Nina Lakhani, why so many potential targets in Mexico, from what you've been able to tell? And of course, the Israeli group continues to say that their software is used only to identify potential terrorists. Would there any indication that any of the phone numbers of the 15,000 phone numbers as potentially targeted in Mexico were connected to terrorists?
Well, they say terrorists and serious organized crime, right? I mean, I think Mexico is a very particular case. We found in the leaked data, there's more than 15,000 individuals in just 2 years, 2016 and 2017, just 2 years. We know that Mexico was NSO's first client, and that when the NSA group started doing business with Mexico around a decade ago, we were already 5 years into the complete failed war on drugs. And by that time, we already knew that Mexican security forces and parts of the criminal justice system were implicated in dire human rights abuses, extrajudicial killings, torture, forced disappearances. So when NSA Group starts doing business with Mexico, its first client, we already knew that the so-called good guys weren't good guys. And I think the case in Mexico, what is so, shocking for me, as well as the depth and the breadth of the sort of potential surveillance that has gone on, is just that, this claim that the NSO Group's claim that we are here fighting the good fight, we are here targeting criminals. Well, the line between good and bad in Mexico is blurred. Right? We know that at a local level, from Cecilio Pinedo and many other journalists reporting, and we know that at a national level. We know that a case that you guys have reported on, the Ayotzinapa case of the 43 disappeared trainee teachers. We know in that case that people at the highest level, including Tomás Veron, who is currently in hiding in Israel and was a key person in getting Pegasus into Mexico. He signed. He was promoting the software and signing contracts. And we know that he's wanted for embezzlement and also for the torture and disappearance of those students. Right. We now know from this investigation that at least 3 relatives of the 43 students were selected as potential candidates for surveillance. So were a lawyer and a human rights leader in a human rights centre who were representing the families. So were at least 2 of the independent experts who had diplomatic status at the time, who were sent to investigate the case. What we see from Mexico is it's a free-for-all. Anyone and everyone was being identified as potential targets for surveillance.
And in terms of the surveillance of the family and campaign operatives of Andrés Manuel López Obrador, that would seem to have been called for by someone in a very high position of power within Mexico itself, no?
It's really astounding. Thinking back to the time, 2016, 2017, Enrique Peña Nieto's government is absolutely tanking in the polls. He has the worst ratings in history of a Mexican president. Scandal after scandal after scandal. Meanwhile, AMLO's is in ascendance, right? His political party, Morena, is starting to win elections at local levels. His popularity is growing, right? And so this is 2016 and 2017 is the year before the general elections, the presidential elections. And we see everybody close to him. His 3 sons, 3 of his sons, 3 of his brothers, his wife, his political advisors, key candidates, Claudia Sheinbaum, who went on to be elected as Mexico City's mayor, many other local and national politicians in the Morena party. But the other thing is, it's not just Morena. We found, in the data, the numbers of politicians from every single political party, including the PRI, including Enrique Peña Nieto's own party, was selected as candidates for potential surveillance. This was far and wide. It's as one intelligence expert said to me, it's a game of spies. You have to know who your political enemies are, and you have to know what they're doing, because information is power. And that's what seems to have been happening in Mexico.
I wanted to bring Dr. Calamard back into the conversation, new Secretary General of Amnesty International. I last saw you moderating an event at Columbia University around the issue of Julian Assange. And I wanted to ask you about the WikiLeaks founder, certainly a person who exposed surveillance. If extradited to the U.S., he could face up to 175 years in prison under the Espionage Act related to publication of classified documents exposing U.S. war crimes. In a recent interview, his partner, Stella Morris, urged the Biden administration to free the WikiLeaks founder. This is what she said.
Something has got to give. They can't maintain this prosecution against Julian while saying that they defend global press freedom or defend the First Amendment in the United States. So the only thing they can do in order to be consistent is to drop the case entirely. It's difficult for me to speak about this. I think there's no doubt that Julian wouldn't survive an extradition.
So that's Julian Assange's partner, Stella Morris. She recently visited Assange at the Belmarsh prison in London. They have 2 children together. Britain is not allowing him to be freed as they weigh this issue of extradition. What are your thoughts, Dr. Calamard?
Well, I think Amnesty's position is very clear that the detention is arbitrary and that he should be released, and we're campaigning for the release of Julian Assange. The allegations made against him and by the U.S. authorities raise a large number of problems and red flags in relation to freedom of the press in particular. But our position is clear. We're campaigning for his release.
And finally, I wanted to ask you about Guantanamo. Guantanamo was just in the news yesterday because after an extended period of time, the first prisoner at Guantanamo has been released under the Biden administration. He was released yesterday to Morocco. Can you talk about, there are now 39 prisoners. He was at Guantanamo for 17 years without charge, like so many of the men there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is Amnesty International, are you calling for Guantanamo to be closed?
Absolutely. Amnesty has called for the closure of Guantanamo for almost, decades, I will say, for as long as it has been in place. One Secretary General of Amnesty very, powerfully referred to the Guantanamo as a gulag of our time. So the position of Amnesty is very clear. This is a non-space, Guantanamo. It's legally speaking, morally speaking, that space that has been created has no significance other than the harm it is placing on people and the fact that it is outside any kind of agreed, understood rule of law. So, we need to see the end of that scar. It's a scar for the United States. It's a scar on our humanity. That's that simple.
We want to thank you so much for being with us, Dr. Agnès Calamard, Secretary General of Amnesty International, speaking to us from London. And thank you to Nina Lakhani, senior reporter at The Guardian, one of the 17 media organizations that are part of the Pegasus Project. Next up, a federal judge has struck down DACA. That's Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. We'll speak to a DACA recipient in Houston. Stay with us.
No need for police, no bosses and no chiefs, no World War III,
just more world peace. Good people free to think and do as we please. The trees are green and the breeze from the sea is clean. Technology advances with the spiritual direction. We please our ancestors and receive protection. My family's content and my kids are confident. Problems aren't prominent, things are looking promising. I'll be working on vacay, I'll be grinding every day. I'm awake in the A-frame, I'll be finding my A-game. You can't find me no place, cause I'll be flying away. When I'm riding my apes hang, that just brightens my day. Atlantic, Pacific, Indian Ocean. The planet is dripping, my soul is in motion. Overseas floating, that poetry is potent. Thoughts are focused globally, my lane is open.
We will rise, yeah, we will rise, we will fight until the end. We will find, yeah, we will find, all we need is all within. As we rise.
Through the Dawn by Rebel Wise. This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez as we end today's show looking at the latest attack against immigrant communities. On Friday, a federal judge in Texas struck down DACA. That's Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. The order does not affect current recipients for now, but blocks the Department of Homeland Security from approving any new applications. At least 80,000 first-time DACA applications pending with U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services are now in limbo. DACA has provided temporary protection from deportation and work authorization to over 800,000 undocumented people who were brought to the U.S. as children. In his ruling, Judge Andrew Hanen, who was appointed by former President George W. Bush, said the program exceeded President Obama's authority when he created DACA through executive action in 2012. President Biden vowed his Justice Department will appeal the ruling. For more, we go to Houston to speak with Cesar Espinosa, DACA recipient and executive director of the Houston, Texas-based immigrant-led civil rights group, FIEL, which is the Spanish acronym for Families of Immigrants and Students in Struggle. He himself is currently a DACA recipient, has lived in the U.S. for nearly 3 decades. Cesar, it's great to have you back. Can you respond to the judge's ruling and what this means?
Well, number one, thank you for having us. I mean, it really was heartbreaking to hear the news after some time that we hadn't had any news on DACA, any negative news on DACA, that we were kind of just coasting along, helping new DACA recipients apply. All of a sudden, on a Friday afternoon, we get this really bad ruling from a judge, which obviously dampened our spirits, but also relit the fire for us to fight for a more permanent solution for Dreamers and our families.
And Cesar, what does this mean, especially in terms of the fact that the DACA recipients have to reapply, even those that are already benefiting from it have to reapply every 2 years?
Well, for many people, let's talk first about the people who are applying right now. The people who are applying right now are those folks who may have, for one reason or another, have missed the initial filing for DACA. Maybe they weren't old enough yet. Maybe they didn't have the $495 to pay for the initial application. But for current DACA recipients, there's 2 major things that are happening here. Number one is the fact that we have to live our lives 2 years at a time at the expense of another court ruling or whatever politics is happening in the country at a time. And number two, for many people who are struggling after the pandemic, who may have lost a job, they are really struggling to come up with the money to have to repay every 2 years the $495.
And could you talk a little bit more about what it's like as a DACA recipient, day-to-day, dealing with planning for your future?
I mean, it really is. We're really in limbo. For many of us, we have put our lives on hold. We have right now the other issue, which is USCIS is taking a very long time to process applications. And so we have DACA recipients who may have, great jobs, who may be teachers or doctors or nurses. But because there's a backlog right now in USCIS, they're not getting their work permits in time and they're getting laid off or they're being let go from their jobs. But just on a personal level, it really is heartbreaking. I recently got married and my wife is constantly worried about what our future is going to be like if I'm going to be able to be in this country. I am currently also waiting for my DACA to be renewed, and she's very fearful of me even doing mundane things like driving to work and just being here in this country. So we really need to find a permanent solution for DACA recipients, but not only DACA recipients, but TPS holders and all the people who are living our lives 2 years at a time.
During President Biden's remarks on the economy at the White House yesterday, he was asked about the whole issue of DACA and immigration reform.
At what point would you consider inflation unchecked to a point at which you would either consider taking action or you would want to see the Fed takes action? And secondly, why do you believe that the budget bill is appropriate legislation for a pathway to citizenship?
Well, first of all, I think we need to find pathways to citizenship. The budget bill is an appropriate way to get around the filibuster to be able to make a judgment as to whether or not they should have a pathway. That's for the parliamentarian to decide, though, not for Joe Biden to decide.
So that's President Biden yesterday. Cesar, what exactly does this mean? What would a path to citizenship look like that would apply perhaps not only to students and workers, but to all immigrants?
Well, number one, we want to see Congress and the president take action. President Biden said one of the things he said during his campaign, or one of his campaign promises, was that he was going to act on immigration in the first 100 days of office. The 100 days have been up, and people are struggling right now to make ends meet. And not only that, but also always in the back of their mind is the fact that they can be deported. For immigrants in general, it would be a life-changing opportunity to be able to come out of the shadows, to be able to fully integrate into U.S. society, and to live a life free of fear, free of the constant fear that you may just be working and for some reason, one reason or another, you're going to be stopped by police and subsequently be deported. So for many people, it will be life-changing. It would also be a huge stimulus to the economy because you would have more people paying into the system. I guarantee you that people would want to go back home to their countries, fly back home, and that would provide a lot of needed stimulus for our economy. So there's many, many reasons to pass comprehensive immigration reform, but more importantly is the fact that our parents and are the folks who brought us here have given this country their entire lives. I've been here for 30 years. My parents have worked very hard. And so all we ask is that they be treated humanely and that they get a pathway to what we believe is what they deserve.
And so how would, in terms of practically, in terms of the road ahead, clearly the Supreme Court is not going to be charitable when it comes to the issue of the Dreamers now given the 6-3 conservative majority. And there is such a close edge or slim edge of the Democrats in the Senate and the House. What do you see as the best road forward for getting some kind of relief for DACA recipients and for others who are undocumented?
I think the best path forward is for us to continue these conversations for folks on both sides of the aisle to realize that immigrants have been essential workers prior to the pandemic. We have been essential workers during the pandemic, and we're going to continue to be essential workers because we are the backbone of this economy. The other thing is that it's important for us to call for folks who are not DACA recipients, who are not immigrants, get on the phone and talk to your legislators and tell them that you believe that we need a pathway to citizenship for all people. And at the end of the day, we just want to make sure that we get a bill passed, and we get a bill passed, at least a temporary bill that would allow people to get work permits and to be able to be here free of the fear from deportation. And then we can work on a pathway to citizenship in a different approach.
Cesar, we just have 30 seconds, but you're also participating in a study of an outreach to Latinx population of Houston around COVID. What are you finding?
We did a groundbreaking study on people's reserve when it comes to the vaccine. Folks can look at it at feelhouston.org/COVID-19. They can download that study. And what we're hoping is that this can help government officials make better decisions when it comes to outreach our community, because what we realize is that what we found out is that our community is not nobody's talking to us, and we need that to happen in order for us to have a stronger and more reliable community.
Cesar Espinosa, we want to thank you so much for being with us. A DACA recipient himself, executive director of the Houston, Texas-based immigrant-led civil rights group, FIEL. And that does it for our broadcast. Democracy Now! Is currently accepting applications for our video production fellowship and our digital fellowship here in our New York studio. Learn more at democracynow.org. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. Stay safe.